everybody. Mike Griffith here. Welcome to today's Ingles on the Beat segment. Really happy and pleased to be joined by ESPN SEC Network's Peter Burns. Peter, thank you so much for joining me. It's early in the year, and yet it's already been such a busy off season, it seems like.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy, right? I mean, I think, it felt like the longest college football season in the history of the sport, and yet we just start already looking into the opener, especially if like you're a Georgia fan, right? I mean, because you got Clemson coming off of their college football berth, and now you know that that's going to be the season opener. And I started out my SiriusXM show this morning with Chris Doering, and we were talking about it, going, how in the world did an LSU guy who's married to an Alabama fan become the biggest Georgia Bulldog fan out there? And it kind of feels like I've taken that mantle so far, man. I'm punch drunk on the Dogs coming in 2021.
I've seen that. You've got quite a Twitter game. For those that don't follow you, they need to, at Peter Burns ESPN on Twitter, at Peter Burns ESPN on Twitter. 221 coaches in the FBS ranks since Kirby Smart began as the Georgia head coach in 2016. First of all, did you do your own research on that? Because that's very impressive, Peter.
Yeah. So what I did was the first tweet that kind of sent it off is I said that, 2019 LSU dominated college football, 2020 Alabama dominated college football. And I said 2021 it's going to be Georgia that dominates college football. And I got a bunch of people that were in the mentions going, oh, we hear this every single year, blah, blah, blah. Kirby can't coach, Kirby can't, blah, blah, blah. And, I was at the gym one day on the treadmill, and I'm like, you know what? Let me actually do the research. I'm like, how many other coaches right now have had the resume that Kirby has had? And I said, let's look at it from just the prism of when he arrived in Athens at 2016, when he became a head coach. And I said, all right, so looking at it from there, how many of the coaches have won 50 games? How many of them have won a conference title? And how many of them have played for a national title? And I came up with it, and I said it was 3. It was Nick Saban, Dabo Swinney, and Kirby. That's the list. And I'm like, all right, well, how many coaches have been there? So I took how many FBS schools there were and how many coaching changes there have been, just added them all up. And I realized, 221 coaches since Kirby got to Athens, and only 3 of them have done what Dabo and Nick have done, which is that list. And I'm like, this whole narrative of that, coaching, Kirby can't coach is just honestly, frankly, I mean, just it's a lazy Twitter take that a lot of people have right now.
Yeah, I think he's improved to 10-6, Peter, against top 10 teams. And you think 3 of those are losses to Nick Saban, right? And he led at halftime of all 3 of those games.
Yeah.
Right?
Or 3, yeah.
Yeah, because they lost this year. They were up 24-20. In fact, it was pretty impressive. I like your take in the sense of you're ahead of, I think, most people with seeing what this Georgia offense could be. Now, the Cincinnati in the Peach Bowl wasn't exactly the best representation of that because the offensive line had been shuffled mightily. They had one guy out, and for some reason they elected to change 3 positions. I think Georgia – Kirby Smart would probably disagree strongly with me, so I want to make it clear this is my opinion, but it sure looked like Georgia might have underestimated that Cincinnati defense, particularly their front, Peter. I don't know how much of the game you saw, but my takeaway was, hey, it wasn't a blowout, which I was wrong. I predicted it would be, but it was the second best thing because these players got to see JT Daniels rally them. They came from behind, and I think there's a value to that.
Yeah, I think there's momentum around a program one way or another on bowl games, and whether or not it's who wants to be there or who doesn't, ultimately the game is played. And I'll go back even further from before the Georgia game. I think maybe the most important thing that happened to the SEC was Florida getting the doors blown off of them by Oklahoma in that game. And I also think that what that led to is a lot of the other coaches in the conference, and I'm not necessarily the players, but the coaches looked at it and go, hey, I don't want to be made of an example and being laughed at like Florida, because everybody comes for the crown that is an SEC squad, especially Georgia, because they have been such a title contender over the last couple of years. So, I think that was important, and that game meant the world to Cincinnati, right? I mean, that was an opportunity for the group of 5 to plant their flag and say, hey, we deserve to be in this part of the conversation a little bit more. And so, yeah, you got their A game, but Georgia's always going to get the A game. I mean, that's part of being the brand and having the G on the hat, right? So for that win, I think it's huge. And now the question is, how do you take it one step further? And all of it kind of started with having a good quality quarterback. When JT Daniels had that tweet and the Instagram thing, it shows him in the tunnel. that got me excited because I'm like, this team was clearly different when JT Daniels was in. And what I was most impressed with it, Mike, and you and I have talked about this, it wasn't just one style. It wasn't just JT throwing it for 400 yards, which he did in a couple of games, but it was I can't remember if it was week 2, was it Missouri or South Carolina, where they ran the ball for 350 yards, right? That to me showed me that Todd Monken felt, hey, I could be multiple in this offense. If we need to attack you this way, we can. If we need to attack you with a rushing attack, we can do that as well. And then you get Zeus coming back. You got James Cook coming back. That's the reason why I started looking at it going, well, who in the hell else is going to be great in absolute elite in 2021? And I can't figure out a team that's going to be more elite than Georgia in the SEC.
Yeah, I think you're right. You take a look in the SEC, certainly a lot of quarterbacks leaving the league. Now, Bryce Young is going to be the next guy at Alabama, and he followed JT Daniels at Mater Dei. But other than that, Bo Nix maybe, questions about Florida's quarterback situation, questions about Tennessee, questions about Kentucky. I'm trying
LSU.
LSU,
I mean,
yeah. I was pretty impressed with the Johnson kid against Florida, but to your point, part of this is, who is the contender? And I think you're right. Getting those 4 games behind them with JT Daniels gives Todd Monken and Kirby Smart an idea of, hey, how do we want to mold this clay?
Well, think about it last year when Tua went down, Mac Jones got an opportunity to play a couple of games for Alabama that he probably wouldn't have. And guess what? It had all the inclination of why he was able to hold off Bryce Young and win that starting job over in Tuscaloosa, and led to what? Third place in the Heisman, and one of the greatest histories an Alabama quarterback has ever had, really the sport has ever had, when you start looking at the actual sheer numbers of it. And so I do think sometimes it's a blessing and a curse, is that, Alabama in 2019, Dylan Moses gets injured. Guess what? He decides to come back. That helped their defense. Same thing with when Tua went down, it helped Mac Jones' development. And JT being able to play enough games this season to develop, but not enough to think, hey, I should go to the NFL, might actually end up being the best thing for the Georgia Bulldogs in 2021.
You're exactly right. And I've actually talked with people in the JT Daniels camp, and who's to say if JT doesn't play against Alabama and beat Alabama or beat Florida and get to that SEC title game, because a lot of this for JT Daniels, and Peter, you've seen this covering sports as long as you have for these athletes, it's about completing the task. It's about completing the drill, and here's JT Daniels, Max Preps Player of the Year as a freshman, as a sophomore, Gatorade Player of the Year as a junior, wins a high school national championship as a junior. So essentially, you don't say goes pro early, he goes college early. He skips his entire senior year, and then things just kind of fall apart a little bit at Southern Cal with Clay Helton and T. Martin, and there was a lot of questions on that staff before they finally settled in, and he looked like he'd be the guy in 2019, and then the knee injury in the first half, and Slovis comes in and the Wally pips him, and then he kind of decides, rather than go back and try to reintegrate myself into this offense where Slovis clearly has a good relationship with the offensive coordinator, let me do some shopping. And let me ask you, I know how I felt that day. How surprised were you when we heard JT Daniels to Georgia? We'd heard LSU, we'd heard Tennessee, we'd heard Ohio State. For Michigan, had not heard anything Georgia down here. Had you heard anything about that? Because we didn't.
No, and that's why I was like, Georgia, I was like, wait a minute, am I missing something about Newman and what's going on? And ultimately, you find out, yeah, sure enough, that was the case. Because I remember vividly, this is before, Jamie Newman had opted out, that we're like, all right, well, how is this going to work? Like, well, probably he's not going to be 100% healthy. So he's going to sit there, wait, and then he'll be the kind of quarterback in waiting. And that's why I think it was so frustrating, Mike, when I saw all this stuff about, Kirby wanted to play, DeJuan Mathis and Stetson Bennett over JT Daniels. And I'm like, has anybody not, saw what you wrote and heard the comments about JT Daniels' family saying, hey, the reason why we love Coach Kirby Smart is because he handled this the right way. And so I just think that there was so many flyby people when they're talking about Georgia football that look at it and go, well, JT Daniels should have been the starter for day one. Well, that wasn't the case. If he could have been, more than likely, I guarantee you probably Todd Monken wanted him to be the starter once Newman had opted out. But you can't put a kid in a bad situation, because the lifeblood of Georgia football now is recruiting, right? And that's why they can contend for titles, is because kids are going to say, hey, I'll go to Georgia and coach will help protect me and help get me to the NFL. That's why that recruiting works so well. That's what Nick has done in Tuscaloosa, to his credit. And I think that, while he's going to take some hits on it, I think Kirby ultimately played the JT Daniels situation perfectly. And it leads up to this ramp of 2021. The expectations were they should be a college football playoff contender at a bare minimum, in my mind.
Yeah, I would agree. Not just JT coming back, but Jordan Davis, a guy that's right there in Charlotte, North Carolina. I mean, listen, you just don't find guys that are, 6'4" and 340 pounds that can dance like this guy and move on the defensive line. I mean, I told people, and some people thought that I might have been getting carried away when I said this doubles their chances, but I said, no, I don't think you understand. Putting Jordan Davis at nose tackle is like having a 12th guy on defense. He essentially eliminates the run game between the tackles and completely changes how teams game plan. Now, Peter, I've had people say, well, why doesn't he get sacks on third down? To say, these big 340-pound guys don't play 80 snaps, man. You're going to put them in the run downs. But I like the fact that you start out next season, and yes, we're going to talk about the secondary, but that defensive front, even with Azeez Ojulari moving on, Devontae Wyatt came back. He's a senior. I think Julian Rochester will be back. He was a senior that injured a knee. You've got Jalen Carter, who stood out at front. You've got very, very strong interior defensive linemen. And then you saw Adam Anderson flash at the end of last year, the outside speed rush guy. And Nolan Smith was a guy that ranked number 1 in the nation overall 2 years ago in the signing class. And Trayvon Walker was the guy that came up with that sack to beat Auburn 2 years ago on the plane. I mean, it's name after name after name. And Nakobe Dean's the 5-star that looks like the next Roquan Smith. With a good front, Peter, I think they can develop that back end as the season moves on.
Well, and that's the deal, is that you go back and look at when Alabama had their, kind of their great defenses back in the day. And I go back a couple of years ago when they had Quinn Williams. You needed to have a disruptor up front, because now with everybody not going to traditional 5-step, 7-step drops and, developing a pocket and everything being a little bit more spread, everybody's getting the ball out so quick. So do you have a game-wrecking guy in the middle? A lot of schools don't. Alabama didn't have one this year. Jordan Davis coming back is monstrous because he can be that guy if he develops a little bit more. And when we talk about players returning, I think it's really important the reason why I was so high on Georgia is because I felt coaches returning too. Like whenever I saw Dan Lanning said, let's run it back one more time, I'm like, all right, I do have concerns about the secondary. And, you lose a coach there and you're losing what it seems like every single person on that secondary. But I'm like, are you trying to break in a new D coordinator? And oh, by the way, here's a new secondary? No, you're not. So landing there is like landing, 3 5-star athletes, because you at least have continuity. And that's what kills teams right now when they don't have continuity at the coaching ranks. And I think it's really going to hurt Alabama. Now, when I say hurt Alabama, I don't mean 8-4 Alabama or 7-5 Alabama like we saw with LSU. But when I say hurt Alabama means, are they going to be winning the title next year? I don't think that's the case. And that's truly another reason why I think it's all Georgia's road ahead of them in 21.
Yeah, and the good news for Georgia, the one guy they bring back is Lewis Cine, and he'll certainly change the way guys go over the middle. Everybody saw that hit on Pitts, and I know he was ejected for targeting, but you go back and look, there really wasn't much Lewis could do. I mean, he led with his shoulder and Pitts lowered his helmet. It's just one of those deals when two guys are going opposite. I don't know if you go low, maybe you take a knee, and, there just doesn't seem to be a good answer, Peter. I've always said this: if you want to protect players, don't throw over the middle, especially Pitts. But certainly guys that play Georgia are going to remember that hit that Lewis Cine put down. He's a fantastic player. I think he's on the rise. But to your point, with Dan Lanning coming back, now they did lose Charlton Warren. We are waiting to see, how is Georgia going to fill this gap. Kirby's done a really good job with this, though. You look at his staffs, and I know we talk about the Nick Saban tree, and I don't know how much we can say it's the Kirby tree, but Shane Beamer,
Mel Tucker,
Sam Pittman. He's got 3 guys that have gone on to be head coaches, and Kevin Shear, and now Charlton Warren, 2 guys that have gone on to be coordinators. So stopping through Georgia, not such a bad idea. Let me ask you now about just kind of give me your go around the rest of the league. I know that, you're high on Georgia. You're on the record. You put it out there again at Peter Burns, ESPN. Georgia fans need to follow you because you put your thoughts out there. You do it really well and also really entertaining follow. But as we kind of go around the horn in the SEC, who could be some teams that could step up and challenge Georgia for SEC supremacy?
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously, when I look at the East, that's the big question mark. Because me and Chris Doring always talk about it on our SiriusXM show is like, what happens with Florida now, right? I mean, you had this kind of LSU-like season to start the year, and of course, it did fall apart, especially against the LSU game, which was a crazy upset. But not having Trask, is Emory Jones going to be the guy that's really, I haven't seen a lot of flashes of him yet that it made me think, okay, this guy's a game changer, and you lose so much. And there was just something, it felt a little off about Florida. And I don't know if it was Dan Mullen getting a little bit over his skis a little bit and kind of feeling the media this year that just didn't feel right. And of course, Tennessee, I like the addition of Kevin Steele over on that defensive staff, but I think they have a bevy of different reasons, both on and off the field, that I don't see them making a change or making a run. I think Kentucky's good, but not necessarily great. Of course, they got Liam Cohen, the new offensive coordinator. They just landed Wendell Robinson, the transfer out of Nebraska. That'll be fun to watch. But I don't know what that offense is going to really look like next year, if it's going to be Bo Allen. And Missouri, to me, is a team I can't really figure out. I don't know enough about what Drinkwitz can do as far as developing his talent. I saw him put out a pretty good season this year, but I didn't necessarily see a brand out of Missouri football other than closing games out. So I don't see where really anybody pushes Georgia. And I think that's the most important thing about this season, is that when you have the stars kind of aligned this way, not only your team is in good shape, but everybody else seems to be kind of not necessarily rebuilding, but not necessarily saying, oh, it's our year also. You have to take control of these games, and you have to take control of this year. And it's interesting, Mike, you talk about, Saban's had this coaching tree. Everything that Kirby does mimics what Saban has done, right? Coaches that work for him are getting head coaching gigs, right? Recruiting is off the charts. Facilities is off the charts. And maybe the most important thing that I have seen with Kirby is that Nick showed maybe his strongest attribute is adjusting and adapting to change. And I felt like Kirby did that, right? I think if Kirby had it all over again, I don't know if James Coley would have called the offense last year. He would have brought in a guy like Todd Monken a year previous to, to have that running his offense. And I think he learned from that, going, hey, I can't just promote from inside. I need to take a guy that can actually do it. And I think we saw Monken kind of get into his comfort zone with his crew once JT Daniels got there, and once the offense got a chance to learn what Todd Monken brings on his coaching strategy. So again, that's why when I look at the East, I don't necessarily see anybody really making a run over at Georgia. And I know Georgia fans are kind of scared about that in a weird way, because they've been, bit before, going, oh, you know what? I mean, we're always supposed to do it and we never do. Like, get the hell over that. Like, they don't have that attitude at Alabama. They don't have that attitude at Clemson. They don't have that at Ohio State. They didn't have it at LSU last year. And I think the fan base needs to be a part of that run as well, too.
Yeah, it's interesting. I remember back to 98 Tennessee when they'd been beaten by Florida so many times, and it was like, okay, Peyton Manning's gone, but then the new quarterback, T. Martin, came in, and the mindset went away. And with JT Daniels coming in, he's not skewed to worry about Florida. He's not skewed to worry about Alabama. He's a guy from the West Coast. They're big thinkers out there. They think a lot bigger than they're here because they're big thinkers. They want to be in the spotlight. They embrace that pressure. They've come running like moth to flame so that they can be talked about on the SEC network by Peter Burns and Chris Doring and the Paul Feinbaums of the world, where nowhere else does college football get this attention. And I've got to ask you, how do you stay so creative, Peter? Because one of the things I enjoy about your shows is there's always SEC football talk, but there are so many creative elements. Are you one of these guys that takes notes or wakes up in the middle of the night and tape records yourself? Because there is one nonstop creativity and fun in your broadcast and television.
No, I appreciate that. I mean, honestly, what it is I'm very ADD, so I'm always thinking about everything other than kind of the sports. And so, yeah, we'll have fun about, hey, where would we rank Kirby on the trips of Vegas? Like if we go to Vegas, where does Kirby rank among the SEC coaches? And I think that's what you have to do, because I think if anything I've learned in this last off season is that, man, sports is supposed to be fun. Like, we look at it through a prism of life and death, and, it's not brain surgery what we're doing. At the end of the day, it puts a smile on our face. It entertains us. It gets us away from everything else that's going on in this world. So, to me, we just decide to have fun and I try to bash the Alabama Crimson Tide as when I can, because I can see my wife calling right now. So I anytime that I can tell an Alabama fan that I think Georgia's going to be really good, I had to get it in her crawl a little bit.
Well, you've done that today, Peter. I sure appreciate. Tell people I know you're on ESPN and SEC Network, but as far as your regular programming, let people know where they can find you, please.
Yeah, every single morning on Sirius XM from 8 to 11 Eastern. You can catch it on demand or on the Sirius XM app. And then also my normal gig is, now we're transitioning into basketball a little bit. I had Joni Taylor on, the great Georgia women's coach, on today, and they're fantastic at 12-1. We're getting ready to go to Scott Strickland's baseball season coming up, so that should be a blast as well too. So just follow me on Twitter, and you can yell at me or there at Peter Burns ESPN. So and I appreciate, Mike, every time you come on, I learned something new about the Dogs as well too. So it's been great to be a part of it.
Thanks so much for joining the show, Peter. It's been great. Peter Burns.
Yeah, bud.
Thank you. All right, folks. Hey, I want to take a break now. I want to thank everyone that's joined the show tonight. Obviously, it's it's the off season, and yet I feel like we have so much to talk about, so much to cover, and Peter Burns does such a great job breaking things down. I think with the SEC Network, he's one of my favorite people, and really enjoy working with Peter. Important to have those sort of relationships. I'll tell you what else is important is our sponsor, Ingles. Ingles, throughout the offseason, you heard Peter talking about sports being fun and trying to have that escape. And boy, did we need it this summer with everything going on. In addition to that, we needed our products. And we needed Ingles. We needed Ingles to keep our shows going, but we also needed Ingles to keep our supplies going, frontline workers, and what a remarkable and marvelous job they did. I want to take a moment right now to recognize the folks at Ingles.
It's in our hearts to feel for real. There's been ups and downs, turnarounds, good days and some bad. We stand together for worse and for better. We'll always have your back with open arms, heart to heart, hand in hand. Community strong.
Well, hey, everybody, welcome back to the program. Mike Griffith here, second half of our Ingles on the Beach show here on Monday night. Really appreciated Peter Burns joining me on the first half of the show. Usually Peter's asking the questions and I'm the one jabbering. I guess I did a little bit of jabbering in there anyway, but really enjoyed talking. I could talk with Peter forever. I'll tell you what, he's also an ace golfer, and hopefully he'll be coming to that Bruce Arians golf scramble this summer. I always like going out there. Kirby's always out there. Wonder if Will Muschamp will be out there, right? So speaking of Muschamp, the big news has been that Charlton Warren headed to Indiana in a coaching capacity. And what will Kirby do now? Well, let me tell you, folks, I know Kirby Smart well enough to know this. He's got a short list. He's already moving and shaking. He's already talking to people. I can almost guarantee that. Now, I didn't have somebody tell me that, but knowing how Kirby works and knowing that he keeps a short list on coaches that he's always interested in, I think you can count on that. So I don't look at the Charlton Warren departure as maybe a negative. Now, what Peter said about the importance of continuity is valid. I'm with him 100% on that. Charlton had been with Kirby the last 2 years. I think he did a nice job with Eric Stokes with an All-American campaign. But I think what Georgia needs, my thought is, they need more of a player's coach. Charlton's kind of a authoritarian, right? An Air Force guy, disciplined, didn't have a lot of tolerance for much mistakes. But maybe somebody a little more personable, right? Now, don't get me wrong. Now, we're not talking about, hiring Mr. Personality. You've got to be able to coach. There's a lot of guys that can coach that are going to come on to work for Kirby Smart. It's separating who's the right fit to work on the back end of that defense with Kirby. Now, a lot of people have said Will Muschamp, and Will is a defensive backs expert. You can go back through his resume. You can read the stuff that I've written on dognation.com about some of the candidates and Will Muschamp. I just feel like where Will's at right now, his age, his experience level, and the guy's getting a $15.5 million payout, his buyout from South Carolina. I don't know if he wants to run right back on to the front lines. I mean, it's a good year to maybe recharge your batteries a little bit, serve in that analyst role. We've seen how that's worked out with Nick Saban. And, Peter referenced how, Kirby, doesn't try to recreate the wheel. Kirby works with whatever's successful other places, not just Saban. Kirby watches other coaching staffs too. So it's not just like, oh, he just watches Nick. He watches everybody. He watches the industry. Everybody watches everybody. That's not unique. I remember Nick Saban telling me he would watch Bob Shoop when Shoop was the D coordinator at Tennessee because he liked some of the concepts that he brought with him from Penn State. So all these coaches, it's a mutual admiration society, and they all look and kind of get different ideas. I mean, the basis of the Georgia defense, came from Kirby Smart meeting with Tom Herman and getting hooked up with the former Houston D coordinator. The mint front, right? And Kirby tells people that it is at his coaching clinics and whatnot. So, there's a network of coaches out there that Kirby knows, that he's familiar with, some that he's worked with. I think that gives people a leg up, right? If you've worked with Kirby before, I think that helps a little bit. At least when I look at some of the hires, it seems like there's been a path crossed at one point or another. Not necessary, not always, but I do think that gives somebody a leg up. So I think they're going to be able to find a secondary coach. More importantly to me is what happens with the talent, right? You got to have guys like Jalen Kimber and Keely Ringo work out. I mean, all of a sudden now, you take a look at it, you count them up. There's 8 guys that have departed this team since the end of the regular season in 2019. You go with Otis Reese. You go with Devad Wilson. Otis transferred to Ole Miss. Devad transferred to UCF before last season. And then you had 6 former starters depart in this class. Mark Webb, Tyreek Stevenson, who started in the Peach Bowl, Richard LeCount, Eric Stokes, Tyson Campbell, DJ Daniel. I mean, that is a lot of talent walking out the door. Now, as I said, Lewis Cine is back, and I think that's so important because I think Lewis is a leader. Now, he's not a real vocal guy, but he is a guy that can communicate well enough to get guys lined up, and he speaks with his play. That hit that he put on Kyle Pitts, folks, I'm never going to forget it. That was an unbelievable strike. And like I said, you go back and watch it in slow motion, and Lewis lowered his shoulder, and what happened was Pitts kind of ducked down, and that's why they ended up helmet to helmet. It wasn't that he targeted. It was kind of one of those happenstance deals. And I know we've talked a lot about that. How can we get away from targeting calls when the defender clearly does not intend to target, and yet it still gets called? But getting back to the point, so you need Ringo to pan out. You need Kimber to pan out. I think we saw enough from Christopher Smith to feel good that he's at least adequate there. Now, I think Christopher will get bigger, stronger, faster in the offseason. Players tend to have more of a sense of urgency when they know they're going to be starting or contending to start. Latavius Brini, another guy who just kind of emerged in that Peach Bowl. We saw Latavius come up and played really well against that Cincinnati screen, particularly in the second half. It was like we watched Brini grow right before our eyes that day. Now, that was Cincinnati. It wasn't SEC level, so we'll wait and see on Brini. We'll wait and see what Smith does. Major Burns, a very talented freshman, might have been a little in over his head early on when he went out there, but this is a guy that's going to come around. This is a very talented player that you have, so that's very exciting. And then you just know that Georgia is going to bring some guys in from the transfer portal. I don't know who those guys are. I don't know when it's going to happen. As I wrote before, the NCAA Division I Council's decision to postpone the vote indefinitely on name, image, likeness, and automatic first-time transfer eligibility, that I think has kind of put some people in limbo where they're not really sure now, gosh, do I want to jump in, right? And so now will the transfers maybe come after spring sessions? Because classes are underway right now. I'm not saying it's too late for somebody to add, although it's getting there, right? Because they started last week. I mean, I don't know when drops and ads end. I probably should know the UGA academic calendar a little bit better, but I'm thinking we're approaching that date pretty fast. If somebody's not transferring in the next couple of days, I don't think it's going to happen until after the spring semester. We know 4 more players coming in for Georgia after the spring semester. You wonder a little bit about these early enrollees and how quickly they're going to contribute. A guy like a Nyland Green, Javon Bullard, you wonder about these guys. How quickly can they get on the field? Sometimes at cornerback, we've seen Kirby put young corners on the field before. Tyson Campbell played as a true freshman. It's harder and harder to do that now, especially the way these passing games have elevated so much. I'll tell you one thing, though. Whoever Georgia puts out there on the field will have plenty of tests in practice. You're going to get tested by George Pickens. You're going to get tested by Jermaine Burton. Hopefully Dominic Blaylock will soon be back. You're going to get tested by Kieris Jackson, right? You're going to get tested by Darnell Washington. Hopefully Marcus Rose will be back also soon from injury. Justin Robinson. You're going to be tested by a lot of these guys. McConkey, there's just so many guys that I think could be difference makers for Georgia. Arian Smith, what a burner he was. Never really got to see Arian get in sync and learn the whole route tree, at least not in the games. But there's going to be an incredible receiving core. And I think that's going to serve to really help and get these Georgia cornerbacks ready. Taking a look now, guys that aren't enrolled yet. Kamari Lassiter, one of the guys that you wonder, with him coming in late, that doesn't mean that he's not going to play right away, but I think it affects him. Jared Wilson, a guard, Jamon Dumas-Johnson, and Dylan Fairchild, the other guys who aren't enrolled. Fairchild not enrolling means he's probably a redshirt. Remember last year when Broderick Jones and Tate Ratledge, two incredibly talented guys, signed in the late period, and Kirby said, hey, there's all these people saying they're going to play right away. It's going to be hard. And he was right. It makes such a difference when you enroll early. We go back to Cade Mays playing ahead of Jamari Salyer because Cade had enrolled early. Sometimes that little leg up when things are as competitive as they are. Right now, though, roster management is going to mean everything. I haven't heard anything on D-Rob, Demetrius Robertson. Is he coming back? He was one of the guys we kind of wondered about. Julian Rochester, he was a redshirt senior also. Remember, Julian had that knee injury against Kentucky. Is he going to rehab that knee again as he had the previous years? Is he going to go through all that again? I think Georgia fans certainly hope so. Only two seniors, Justin Schaefer, Devontae Wyatt, they both said they're back. And then you get into the redshirt juniors, right? Stetson Bennett, Robert Beal, William Poole, Amir Speed, a guy I failed to mention. Speed did good when he was out there on the corners. Maybe Speed gets a second long look at the cornerback position because that's a guy that's been in the program for a minute, right? He's been around the block a few times, and I think he's well thought of in the huddle. So it's going to be really fascinating times. I can't wait for the start of spring drills. Typically, Kirby starts that middle of March. January, February. Really, we're not that far off. We're really only 2 months off. The guys are already kind of getting back in their off-season conditioning programs, the weightlifting and whatnot, and the training. Last year, how important was it? The NCAA now has allowed these guys to do a little bit more than just lift weights. So you can bet that there's things that are being worked on. Also, that indoor football facility, I don't know if you've seen it lately. It is really coming on, really looking good. Things are looking up at Georgia, man. It is an exciting offseason. That Peach Bowl win, and I know some people shrug and say it was Cincinnati, but I'm going to tell you, that was one determined Cincinnati team. That was a Cincinnati team that was fighting to be the best Cincinnati football team in school history, and they were that close to tearing that Bulldog head off and putting it on the wall and claiming a national title as an undefeated team, a la Central Florida 2017, after they beat Auburn in the very same game. Cincinnati was that close. And Georgia, even with all those guys out, 5 starters were out from Georgia that played the previous game. 10 starters were out that had started at some point during the season, right? That was a Georgia team with a lot of attrition, and yet and still they found a way. A couple of new guys, right? JT Daniels driving him 80 yards with 128 left and no timeouts. Jack Podlesny, how many of you had heard of Jack really before this season? And there he was kicking the 53-yarder with 3-4 seconds left. It meant everything. Kenny McIntosh on the final drive really emerged. Tells you something about that running back battle, right? It was Kenny McIntosh on the field. Of all the running backs, it was Kenny that JT went to 3 times on that final drive. There's a lot of trust there that tells you about the direction of this offense. So a lot of things to talk about. Such an exciting time. Love doing the Eagles on the Beat show. Really appreciate you joining me. I want to thank Peter Burns for joining me again. I really enjoy my work with Peter Burns and the SEC Network. I did his Sirius XM show all year on Wednesdays with him and Chris Doring and Jacob Hester, and just a true pro. And we were really fortunate to have Peter to give us his opinions. And it's interesting to see a national media figure that's kind of sticking their neck out for Georgia. Peter is on the Kirby Smart bandwagon, just like I know all of you are, right? So again, thanks for joining me here on this Monday night. Hey, want to encourage you. We're going to have on the SEC Country Facebook page. SEC Country Facebook page. In just a little bit, it's going to start at 8 p.m. We're going to have a freshman All-American show. And we're going to have some guys in the SEC that you've heard of. And Gene Stallings, legendary coach, will be my VIP speaker. A little different than Dog Nation, but something I think SEC fans will enjoy. Don't forget, every day, Dog Nation Daily with Brandon Adams. Tomorrow night, Connor Riley, our Tuesday night programming. Wednesday, it's Before the Hedges with Jeff Santel. Thursdays, catch us for our Cover 4s. And then I do a Friday night show as well. So keep tuned in to our Dog Nation Facebook page. Check us out on dognation.com and have a great week, everybody.